it's live.
I'm getting YouTube shared.
Got it.
Yeah, sorry, it was just taking a second for it to upload on uh, YouTube. All right, let's get going. We got a couple people in the video now, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank y'all for joining us today. Uh, you know, we got week 1 in the books for the Gamecocks and Clemson Tigers. Even though South Carolina did win, it was a stressful matchup last night, which I don't think it should have been, but that's the world we live in with South Carolina football, and it was pretty much a day to forget for the Clemson Tigers. Not much went right for them against Georgia. We're going to get into both games today. Steven, I know you. I don't know if you watched much. Just kind of give your thoughts on yesterday before we get into the game slates.
I watched 2 games, and it was Clemson and Carolina, and that was it. That was enough for me, especially
Yeah.
after that Gamecock game. I didn't want to watch any more football after that. That was just disgusting.
It kind of watching South Carolina football, it kind of takes the life out of you, where you have to allow yourself some time to decompress, which I'm glad, because going off our conversations from last night, I'm kind of glad we're going live today and not last night, because I think our emotions were still running high a little
Yeah.
bit after the game. Did you get to watch any game day or anything?
A little bit, not a whole lot. I mean, it was on, but kids running around everywhere. It's hard to pay attention.
Yeah. It's funny watching Pat McAfee and Nick Saban sit beside each other on game day, because they are just the complete polar opposites of each other. And
Yeah.
so it's, people have their opinions on Pat McAfee. I don't mind them. I think his antics are a little much sometimes, but I guess that's what you get for, when you bring him on. That's just his personality and everything.
Yeah.
But needless to say, it was a good weekend of football. The teams that were supposed to win did win. No major upsets or anything, in my opinion. Some top teams did struggle. I know Michigan struggled last night. But coming off a national championship win and losing a lot of people, coaches, that was expected. So let's go ahead and jump into our game slate. We are going to start off with the South Carolina Gamecocks. I will say this before we jump in. Like I said at the top of the show, a win's a win. I hope people have kind of dampened their expectations with Lenore Sellers. I think he's going to be a great quarterback for us. But again, the experience he got last year were garbage time games. I know he played in 3 games, but the highlights that stuck out to people last year was his pass against Furman, and then his what he did against Vanderbilt. And I mean, he showed he was a freshman quarterback last night. Again, we got the win, so there's a lot to get into. South Carolina only mustered 288 yards of total offense. And I'll ask you in just a second here, Stephen, but the Dow Loggins experience, I don't know what it is with South Carolina. It feels like dating back to the Muschamp era. We just can't seem to get a offensive coordinator. What you think?
Yeah. Well, it's just kind of hard to know what he is as a coordinator, because Rattler and Sellers, they're 2 different types of quarterbacks. Rattler's definitely more your pro style, want to sit in the pocket. Obviously, he can use his legs, but he much rather just find a receiver downfield, where it seems like Lenore's is, at least yesterday, and I hope they're not coaching it this way, but it looked like he was a one read and then out. And that's just kind of high school ball, I guess,
Yep.
where, if your primary target isn't open, roll out and run. And that just, you can't win in college with that type of quarterback play. And honestly, whenever Lenore's was throwing the ball, he was selling it, getting our receivers in trouble, putting them in bad spots. So as far as OC, it seems like he's constantly having to try and figure out what works best for the personnel that he has, instead of just running whatever system that, he would like to run. Because again, you're changing from a pro style quarterback to a dual threat, but as of now, the only threat that Lenore's has is probably his legs, because as far as passing, he did not look very good at all when it came to throwing the ball yesterday.
He looked uncomfortable, and like you mentioned, in terms of tucking the ball and running, he did have a lot of QB design runs yesterday.
Right.
But like I said, it's going to come with time in terms of reads and just trusting your receivers. This is, I'm glad we've kind of had a little bit to kind of decompress and gather our thoughts on the game. It's going to come with time with Sellers. The offensive line, I thought they played okay. It wasn't the best by no means. But kind of going back to Dow Loggins, my only issue with him is there's just no, and you can even go back to last year's first year with us. There's no, I don't know. It seems to me there's no game plan. It's just, they're just going to call plays, whatever they feel. And there's nothing to kind of get Lenore in a rhythm, whether if it's like shorter passes. It all seemed to be, they were more concerned with throwing the ball deep downfield. And that's fine when you have an established quarterback that has the confidence and isn't trying to build up confidence, and just getting him comfortable and then working into those deep throws. Because, he had a beautiful pass. It was unfortunately dropped, but we can't just run the ball like we did yesterday. Going against Kentucky, when we struggled against Old Dominion, that's not to diminish what Old Dominion is, but this game should have not been 23-19 where we were struggling to score. And thank God for our defense forcing turnovers, because we wouldn't have scored a touchdown without those turnovers, because it put us in. I believe the first turnover we were on maybe the 4-yard line, and then the second turnover that led to a touchdown, we were inside the 10-yard line both times. And we put together decent drives, but we couldn't make anything of it because we can't pass the ball. Right. And, I don't know if that's from lack of, play calling, not being able to pass block effectively. It was all over the place for the offense last night.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it may come with time, but with our schedule, you don't really have time to let it, grow. It's pretty much, you got to come out of the gate and be ready to play. I'm surprised that we didn't see Ashford any. Obviously, this is someone who has college experience at playing at Vanderbilt, especially when things weren't going right and you knew that you were struggling to throw the ball and you were pretty much, at one point losing the game. Yeah. For me, I would have probably thrown in some experience out there, because unfortunately, if it's not going well for you, you can kind of go through growing pains. If let's say the running game was working really well and Rocket Sanders had, 3 touchdowns and we were able to just run the ball really effectively, and not have to worry about passing, but you got to a situation where you're losing the game, you got to be able to throw the ball. And you just don't have the time to deal with growing pains, especially in the SEC, and especially with just the schedule that we're going to play. Like you said, we got to go to Kentucky. So this is supposed to be like your warm-up game, and it looked awful. And then now you got to go on the road to what's now going to be his first SEC game, is going to be on the road. You just don't have time to grow.
Yeah, and Beamer doesn't have time, because this is year 4, and again, my thing with Shane Beamer is, it just seems like he doesn't. I don't know. It just doesn't seem, there's no sense of urgency where. Right. It's make or break time for him. This is like I said, this is year 4. This isn't year 1 or year 2. where you're trying to rebuild something. You basically remade your roster the past 2 off seasons in the transfer portal.
Yeah.
Again, we do have a true freshman quarterback, but again, that goes on to you have to prepare him. And he mentioned last night in his press conference where, majority of these receivers are still, they're still getting comfort with the quarterback because they weren't in spring ball. They didn't get there till the summertime. And I'm sorry, like you just don't have the luxury of banking on another 4 to 5 win season this year.
Yeah.
And because I don't think he's going to get fired. But last night, again, I understand there's going to be struggles in the first game of the season. That's completely understandable. It's again, we just don't have the luxury of another disappointing season. Beamer doesn't, and I get he wants to exude confidence and stability in the press, but behind the scenes, like he's got to be lighting a fire under these guys' butts, and even the coordinators. Like, I mean, I thought the defense played great yesterday outside those 2 busted plays with the pass and the QB run. There's definitely some stuff to build on, but Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard on the edges couldn't ask much more for them.
No, they look really good. They look really good. If you want to find a bright spot, it was, the defensive line I thought played pretty good. Defense as a whole, like you said, other than those busted plays, they look better than last year. They forced turnovers that kept us in the game.
Forced 4 turnovers.
Right. Eventually, teams are going to score. If you can't score and you can't maintain drives and put points on the board consistently, you can't fault your defense for eventually giving up points. It's just going to happen when they're out there for the amount of time that they were.
Yeah, especially when your offense can't sustain any drives and keep the defense off the field. Before we keep going, we got a couple of comments. I know Caleb says, do y'all think Beamer should be fired this year with the possibility of just 4 wins?
Yes. If he wins only 4 games, we were already talking in the preview, like what does he need to do to like be comfortable? And it was like 6 or 7 wins, I thought. But if he doesn't make a bowl game, which is obviously 5 or less wins, then obviously the seat would be really hot. But I mean, I think after yesterday's performance, that seat's already warm. At least because it's not getting any easier. You've got like 2 more easy games, technically easy games in Akron, and then whoever it is at the end of the year. But it's not going to get any. I mean, even here's the thing: is like normally you could count Vandy as almost a for-sure win, but you can't do that now because they looked pretty good yesterday. I mean, they had a big win, and so you got a team like Vandy they're probably not going to be a 7-8 win team, but they're making strides, and it looks like we're not progressing at all.
Yeah, it coming off a 5 and 7 win season last year. Beamer was talking about how these guys are fired up. There's excitement around the program, which that's great, but there seems to be no progress made from the off season to the beginning of the game. We still have a long season ahead of us. We've got 11 more games. So, I mean, there's plenty of time to showcase, any progress that we can make, because on the offensive side of the ball, there's a lot that needs to be done. But to answer Caleb's question, I don't know. I don't honestly. I don't know. I think there can be a conversation. If he wins just 4 games this year, it wouldn't surprise me if he gets fired, but I don't think he does. I don't know, but I guess it just depends how we look at it.
But the way that Ray Tanner does things, he probably wouldn't. But if it's less than 4, it's got it. 4 wins, you got it, because you've consistently gone backwards from where you started. You made 2 bowl games, and then you didn't make a bowl game, and then if you only win 4 games, that means you lost. I mean, you won less than when you didn't make a bowl game. That's consistently going backwards. So that's showing no improvement. So you're not building any faith in the fan base to say, we got this under control, we're making progress, but you're not, and that's evident, and everybody sees it.
And honestly, I think if Beamer does get fired, I think Ray Tanner's got to be on the hot seat as well.
Yes,
because you can't screw up 2 consecutive. He's hired 2 football coaches.
Yeah,
Muschamp and Beamer. You saw the first one worked out. So if the second one doesn't work out, whoever makes the decisions, who is the athletic director, I think Ray Tanner needs to be on the hot seat.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't surprise me if we win 4 games this year, if he's fired, but it's just too early to tell. It just depends how we look in the other games, honestly. I mean, because it's like you said, the season doesn't get any easier for us outside of the 4 games we on paper should win. So I think it's too early to tell. It, like I said, just depends what we look at. And so it's, and Mr. Steve's saying, doesn't win 7 games, needs to be removed as performance based. That is true. I mean, this is a performance based industry. It just doesn't help that we're playing in the SEC where there's really no buffer zone for our schedule to. This was the game last night, and there's 3 games. It was Old Dominion, Akron, and Wofford were supposed to be like our quote unquote tune-up games to kind of showcase what we are. So, I think the conversation can be had, but we'll see at the end of the year. But I was very pleased with our defense. It was kind of like what made us so successful those first 2 seasons under Beamer, where defense causes turnovers, we score points off those turnovers. And, 4 turnovers should equate to 4 touchdowns. But, you take what you can get in games like last night because nothing was going right for us. So, at the end of the day, I am happy with the win. So it sucks to say, but, the way that game was going, it could have been worse. We could have lost. So I'll take that. But we definitely have to work on Lenore Sellers. Like we can't let our quarterback run 22 times a game.
Yeah.
And like I said, some of that was design run. Some of it was on Lenore's probably just not being comfortable back there, going through his reads, not trusting the receivers to be there, and just kind of not panicking, but then just running and taking off. And it worked, but you can't keep doing that because as you get on longer in the season, teams are going to catch on to that and they're going to force you to throw the ball. And you're not going to be able to run. And that happened last night against Old Dominion, and we couldn't adjust. And it, I don't know if that's just having a not so capable coordinator, just kind of going as the flow takes us throughout the game.
Yeah, they got to figure it out, or it's going to be a long season. So
yeah, because I mean it doesn't get any easier. We got Kentucky this weekend, then we got LSU, then Akron, then the bye week. What did you think about the offensive line play last night?
Again, it's hard to tell. I think that we ran the ball pretty good, but as far as pass blocking, it's hard to tell because he was a one read and out.
Yeah.
So you really don't know how effective they were, in pass protection because he wasn't, allowing them. He wasn't allowing them to give him time as far as, just sitting in the pocket. I think he would every now and then he tried, but really and truly he was one read, they're not there, I'm out, and then trying to, hit a hot route or something like that, or either just running. And so, I thought they looked good for what we were able to see.
Yeah. And again, and let's give a shout out to our local guy, Josiah Thompson. He did start. He went out for a little bit. I didn't know if it was something where they weren't pleased with what he was doing, but just come to find out, apparently he got poked in the eye. So, because there was a period where I saw Tree Bobbleade was at left tackle, but then I saw a tweet this morning where Josiah was out for a little bit because he got poked in the eye. So, it's always good to see our local guys here performing. I mean, that's a big deal being a starting left tackle as a true freshman in the SEC. You don't see that very often, but, credit to Josiah. I know he put on a ton of weight when he got to Carolina. Again, with the offensive line, it's all about it's just allowing more time to get repetition and getting comfortable with each other. That's a position where you need a lot of experience with one another I'm trying to think of the right word to use, but it's going to take game experience to kind of get the ball rolling with that offensive line.
Yeah.
So it's going to come with time, but we did allow some sacks last night, but I think it was more so they knew we weren't going to be able to pass the ball effectively. So when we were passing, they were just blitzing everybody, and you can't block every person that's on there. Before we move on, Jonathan Davis said Ray Tanner should be fired than Beamer. I kind of agree. You know,
Yeah,
like I said, if Beamer does end up getting fired, I think the conversation should be had with about Ray Tanner because
yeah,
it's and you go across all sports where he's hired coaches, it's the jury's kind of still out. I mean, he's gone through two baseball coaches. Um, basketball coach, he didn't hire. I don't believe he was the AD when we hired Frank Martin, but I mean, we hired. Um, why's the basketball coach's name slipping my mind?
Lamont Paris.
Lamont Paris. So yeah, I mean, it definitely that's a discussion that should be
Yeah,
had. We kind of touched on the defense. I thought they looked great, forced 4 turnovers. Outside, DQ Smith is frustrating to me. The 2 touchdowns they scored last night, I don't understand. It's usually the same thing with DQ Smith where he's getting beat all the time, or if it's just bad communication. I don't know. Like he's frustrating to me
yeah,
because all the other secondary were mostly fine, but DQ Smith is kind of like the same old record every year with him.
yeah. It looks like he kind of tries to jump routes, maybe, or just kind of gets lost in translation and then busted play.
Yeah,
But yeah, as a whole, I thought the defense looked good. Again, we don't really know how tough the competition was that they were facing. We'll know a little bit more, I think, this coming up week, and then especially the week after with LSU, kind of how that defense is going to look. But in terms of where they were last year, yeah, I think they definitely made an improvement.
do you think Shane Beamer is the right man for this job?
It doesn't seem like it. And unfortunately, I think it came down to that he was a fan hire. Obviously, he wasn't a coordinator anywhere. He had no head coaching experience, of course. He had no coordinator experience. He was a tight ends coach. I think that at the time the fans and former players kind of pushed him into that role. He came out with a bang, making a bowl game in his first 2 years. But it just seems like he hasn't gained any momentum off of that. And again,
Yeah.
we're not even staying pat at making bowl games. We're going backwards. Didn't make one last year. Now it's kind of looking like we're just trying to find 4 wins this year. So as of right now, I would say he's not the guy, because here's the thing. He keeps coming out and saying, we got to coach better. And, it starts with me. Well, yeah, and nothing's improving. So obviously what you're doing, something's got to change your approach and how, you're saying that you got to coach better, because what you're doing isn't working.
Nothing infuriates me more, and this goes back to the Muschamp era. When a coach comes out and says, we have to coach better,
Yeah.
I hate that. You and your staff get paid millions of dollars
Yeah.
to make sure these guys are prepared. Yes, there's going to be hiccups and sloppy play the first couple of get that, but that infuriates me. Like, what have
Yeah.
you done all off season? What have you
Right.
done? Like, for you to come out and say you've had from the moment we lost to Clemson last year till yesterday to prepare for Old Dominion, get your guys ready. And I know you don't spend every day with them, but still, like, I can't stand you get paid millions of dollars. You're the head football coach of South Carolina.
Yep.
You can argue the staff and hires that he's made at coordinator positions all the way down to assistants, analysts, whatever you make it. That's your job. That's why y'all get paid, again, millions, if not thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. Like, I can't stand that when you say you have to coach better. And in his press conference, his post-game press conference, where he was like, I'm paraphrasing here because, I'm not going to give exact quotes, but he's like, we're going to celebrate. We only get 12 games a year. You bet your butt we're going to celebrate. There's nothing wrong with celebrating, but don't you dare make it seem like you beat the number 1 team in the country last night. You were 3-touchdown favorite against Old Dominion, and it took a miracle from the gods for us to win. What's going on? What happened there?
It just froze up a little bit.
You there, Steven?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, so it wasn't a good first game for South Carolina. They're
Wow.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah. So there definitely needs to be some major fixes made before next Saturday, because
Yeah, for
if
sure.
if we come out like we did against Old Dominion, against Kentucky, it's going to be a long night and it's going to be a long season for us.
Yeah.
So,
Uh,
but again, we won 23-19. We'll take it. It wasn't the best performance, but at the end of the day, we did start the season 1-0. Unfortunately, our upstate rivals, the Clemson Tigers, cannot say the same thing. Um, Steven, that was a beatdown, and
yeah.
it was mostly just it was a tale of two halves. I think this goes beyond, because this always seems to be the easy go to when Clemson doesn't look good and loses, is that Dabo inability to adapt to the transfer portal era. I think this goes way beyond the transfer portal for Clemson.
Yeah. Well, really and truly, this was just obviously one team that's elite and they're at the mountaintop, and they're just the best team in the nation, at least for now, until somebody else wants to show something. And Clemson's just not there. Even at 14, I still think that's the way that they looked yesterday. They're the same way as South Carolina. Like, there's no offense. They couldn't do anything. But again, they obviously were playing probably the best defense in the nation. But yeah, tell it two halves. I mean, honestly, for the first half, neither one of them could do anything offensively. It was a defensive battle.
No.
And I figured, we knew that Clemson has kind of relied on their defense. And that's, outside of the few years with Trevor Lawrence and, Deshaun Watson, that's kind of how they've, made their success is through their defense. And I thought that maybe, the way their defense looked in the first half, again, all they had to do was score one touchdown because it was a 6-0 game at halftime.
Yeah.
And, they're right there in the game. But then second half, Georgia came out, and obviously Kirby Smart must have crawled all up in them during halftime or something, because they came out and it looked like a completely different Georgia team. And it was just it was a beat down from there.
Yeah, and it, like I said, this has just kind of been par for course for the Clemson Tigers the past, honestly, 5 years. It was the DJ years and just didn't work out. Then they went to Cade, and Clemson goes out 2 seasons ago and hires the top assistant offensive coordinator you can get in college football, and nothing's changed. Like, Cade hasn't progressed. He hasn't.
Right.
The offense just looks lost, and there's only so much your defense can do for you. Like, if you can't sustain any drives, there's only so much your defense can do. If they're just constantly on the field and not, your offense isn't giving any consistent drives, just keeping them off the field so they can rest a little bit. What happened yesterday is going to keep happening for Clemson. And in order for them, their season's not over. But again, if you're looking to compete for national championships, what happened yesterday can't happen, because guess what? Yeah. You're going to be playing those teams again if you make the playoffs. And you've seen it with Clemson the past several years where, their offense has kind of done enough to keep them in games, but it's always been their defense to kind of rescue them and get them to win games or win ACC championships. And Clemson just doesn't have any playmakers, at least on the outside. You I don't know why this stream keeps going out. But you look at, they just don't have any playmakers on the outside. I mean, they don't have any receivers that are legitimate deep threats.
Yeah. And again, but they don't really try and stretch it deep. They run the same type of offense they've always ran, where you're just quick passes, a lot of bubble screens. But obviously they don't have.
That's not going to work against Georgia.
No.
That's not going to work against the top teams in the country.
No.
That may work against a low level team like the Citadel or something like that. But if you're wanting to compete for national championships, you have to be able to stretch the field. And like you said, they don't. They just do simple concepts, and it ends up hurting them. Like, Georgia made every adjustment you can make during halftime, and they came out that second half rolling.
Yeah.
And they didn't slow down.
Yeah. Well, the good thing for Clemson, though, is it does get easier from here. I mean, that is going to be the toughest team they play all year.
I know,
So
but
it gets easier, but it's not like it's. If they come out and they play like that, even their games that you should expect, they're going to be just like South Carolina. There's going to be games where normally you would look at them and say, yeah, they should win this game easily. They should be able to, beat NC State. They should be able to beat well, it doesn't seem as easy now, the way that they look. Again, some of it is they were probably playing the best defense in the nation. So it is going to be tough. But if you consider yourself to be one of the best teams, you got to be able to at least compete. And they weren't even competitive. Like I said, the only reason that it probably wasn't a bigger blowout than it was is that it took Georgia the whole first half to really get their offense going. But if Georgia comes out and they play like that from the opening kickoff, man, it could have been 70-3. I mean, the way that Georgia was rolling in the second half, if they play 4 quarters like that, it could have been worse for sure.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean the schedule may get easier for Clemson, but again, if you don't have a competent offense that can score points, it doesn't matter who you play. Like, I mean, App State's no cakewalk. Yeah. They're a good group of 5 team out of the Sun Belt. Like and they normally do pretty good against, Power 5 teams. Now, we'll get into that in our our preview show this week. But I don't think there's any positive Clemson. There's nothing positive Clemson fans can take from yesterday. And it just kind of seems where Dabo, it just nonchalantly, everybody's always going to bring up the transfer portal in his press conference. I know he's probably kind of tired of talking about it, but they're just, at least on the offensive side of the ball over the past half decade, they haven't progressed at all. No. And they, like I said, they go out and get the top coordinator in Garrett Riley. I don't know if he's limited on what he's able to do within. I don't know if Dabo's like, hey, this is the type of offense I want to run, or if they just don't have a quarterback to do anything. And I don't know if that goes back to like a talent evaluation standpoint, because they've missed on 2 back-to-back quarterbacks that were, you can say what you want about the recruiting rankings, but I mean, these were top quarterbacks out of the high school class that they were in respectively, and just hasn't worked out for them. And there's only so much you can depend on your run game or your defense just to consistently bail you out.
Yeah, they it can't be that Dabo is telling, if you want to run a certain style of offense, you go and find a coordinator that runs that type of offense. You don't bring in a guy just because he's a big name and he would be a huge hire and then tell him to completely change his style of offense. If that's what happened, then Dabo, he's incompetent. But I don't think that's what happened. I think that this is just Garrett Riley's style of offense, and it just happens to be the style of offense that Clemson's always ran. But, I mean, honestly, you got to start looking at maybe a different quarterback. The same way with Sellers with South Carolina. Like, hey, if it ain't working, you got to try something. And again, they could come out and look dominant against App State and then dominate NC State, and it could have just been a bad game. But the thing is like, this is what their offenses looked like for 4 years, and it didn't get better when Garrett Riley got there. It didn't get better when Cade took over. It is what it is. I mean, this is what their offense has been. A lot of it is that he doesn't use the portal because you're constantly trying to use true freshmen straight out of high school, where you could have – Clemson could easily go and get some of the top transfer kids just because of their name, their recent history. They've got to have the donors that'll, fund the NIL. Again, if Dabo wants to stick to that, that's fine. But when you put out performances like this, you're constantly going to get questioned about NIL and transfer portal because you're like the only one who is constantly, pushing it aside and just being boneheaded about not using it. And then you put out stinkers like that. And then you got fans that are just wondering, well, we were supposed to be competing for a national championship this year. Yeah. Because you got an easier path to get there. All you got to do is win your conference. You don't even have to be, the top 15 in the nation. Just win your conference and you can get into the playoffs. But it's going to be tough for them to win their conference if they continually play like that, because even though they aren't in the SEC, the ACC does look like it may be a little bit down this year, because Florida State, obviously, they're not what everybody expected them to be. or at least they didn't look like it against Georgia Tech. But it looks like all these teams in the ACC may be kind of on the same playing field. Nobody's really like head and shoulders above the other one. So, yeah, Clemson's got to make some changes, or either it's again they could lose a few games and still win their conference and get in. So, I think it's a lot easier for Clemson to get in than say South Carolina, just because of the schedule we'll have to play and the conference that we're in. But even if you get into the playoffs, man, if you look like that all throughout the year and you squeak into the playoffs, it's going to be embarrassing.
Yeah,
because you're going to have to play teams like Georgia, or you're going to have to play Georgia.
Yeah, it's and kind of talking. I was watching some of the post game press conferences, and they were talking with Cade Klubnik, and somehow he's telling his guys, I'm going to come back or go into practice or whatever on Monday, motivated, not giving up this, and this. I mean, that's all good and fun, or not fun, but it's like all good in theory. But you have to improve on the field. Like This is his second full year, and he hasn't made any progress. He hasn't improved at all. There's nothing he's done better today that he did last year. It's the same thing. It's the same story over and over and over again. And again, I think it goes back to they just don't have any athletic receivers on the outside. I mean, they've got Antonio Williams. That's about it. I mean, they had the true freshman Brown from last year. He was basically non-existent. I think at one point there was one receiver for Clemson who had positive yardages, positive yards receiving, and it was Antonio Williams. And I understand you're going against Georgia's one of the top teams in the country, probably the best overall team, top to bottom in the country. But that's what halftime adjustments are for, and it just doesn't seem Clemson, at least on the offensive side of the ball, made any adjustments. And I don't know if that's just lack of ability or a lack of coaching, but it just didn't look pretty. And I think Clemson fans are starting to wear thin a little bit with Dabo, because it's been the same old story the past several years. And they may be successful in terms of wins and losses on their record, but they haven't been that team when they won 2 national championships where like that team is dominant. They were the Georgia. They were the Alabama several years ago, and they're just not now. And I don't know how you fix it. I mean, he tried to fix it when he hired Riley, but it doesn't appear it's worked out or it's working out. I don't know if they make any changes. I've seen several tweets where they're calling out position coaches. Again, it goes back like it. It doesn't matter what coaches you have if you just don't recruit the right talent. It doesn't matter, and that goes back to Dabo and NIL, not necessarily the portal, but again, like we said on our preview show, kids are looking at a lot more other than just the school to come out of high school now. I mean, there's an offensive lineman from North Carolina that was apparently, this is all hearsay, demanding like millions of dollars just to get him to go to your school. And I sure as heck know Clemson's not going to do that. South Carolina's not going to do that.
Yeah.
And so this goes beyond just the transfer portal. It's the NIL era, and it's what can you do for me, not what I can do for you. And it just hasn't been something Dabo's been able to do. But needless to say, I mean, this isn't, end all be all for Clemson. They got App State next week. The schedule does get a little bit easier for them. But again, if they don't show any progression and changes in offense, it's just, they may be there on the wins and losses, or have more wins, but you're just never going to get back on the top of that mountain with that offense you have now. It's just not going to happen. And I'm more than happy to eat my word if that ends up being false, but at least from what we can see, it's just not it for Clemson right now.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be a struggle on offense for them. But don't hate it for them though. Whatever, good for them.
Yeah, at least from a Gamecock fans perspective, yesterday would have been a lot worse if we'd have lost. I'm happy Clemson did lose, but again, I don't think this is something they hang their hats on. It's just one game, 11 more games to go. But if yesterday was any preview of what the season's going to be like, it's going to be a long season for Clemson in terms of when they when they play these top opponents if they make it to the playoff. But needless to say, like I said, Clemson 0-1 to start the season. They have App State next week, South Carolina 1-0 at Kentucky next week. We begin SEC play. Before we get out of here, Stephen, do you have anything else you want to talk about? Anything else you have? Any thoughts you have?
I think both teams need to get better at playing football and not just doing press conferences. Because it seems like that's all both coaching staffs and players are good at right now for both schools is talking and just trying to say the right thing. And really all they're doing is they're making it worse because you obviously see the product on the field, and then you come out and you say things like, well, we're going to celebrate. You don't have to say that. You can go in and celebrate with your team and say, look, guys, wasn't the best game. But we only get so many opportunities to celebrate. So as a team, we're going to celebrate, but we got to get better. You don't have to come out and tell the fan base who's already pissed at what you just showed them on the field that, hey, we're going to go and celebrate. Dude, we don't want to hear that. At some point, the talking has to stop and actually show on the field. You can't just keep saying we got to coach better. Actually go and coach better. Figure out a way because what you're doing isn't working. And it's the same thing with Dabo. And with Clemson, like you got to change something up. And if you don't make the changes, you're just going to continue to see and get the product that you saw on Saturday. That's my final thoughts.
Is there ever a scenario where Clemson – do you think there's ever a scenario where Clemson moves on from Dabo or Dabo just resigns?
Oh, man. Honestly, if Clemson has a year where they're like 7-6 – and the bad thing is like as things are trending, like Dabo used to be like a top name to like go somewhere else or go to the NFL. But like now people are just kind of out on him because one, the product on the field isn't like elite anymore. And then the same thing is like he's always just he ends up being a joke on like Twitter because of stuff that he says. And it's not even like people that are Clemson or Carolina fans or even from the state of South Carolina to say it's like a national thing that, oh, what did Dabo say now? And so I think he's kind of even like that's the bad thing is like if he has a 7-6 season, like nobody really is going to want him. And but also like does Clemson keep him at 7-6? I don't think they're going to go 7-6 this year. I think they're still going to pull out 9 or 10 wins, or at least 8. But eventually he can't just be like 7-6, 6-6. Especially in back-to-back years, they may give him some leeway if he has let's say he has a 7-6 year this year. All right, dude, you got another year to get it back on track. But again, if he is trending down, you got to go and get somebody that's going to get your program back up.
Yeah, I don't think it'll ever be a situation where Clemson fires him. I think he just resigns.
Yeah,
and
he'll probably go and get a TV gig or something like that, or maybe go to the NFL. But it's going to be tough for him to get another like college job because he's not like the big name right now. And then unfortunately, like any of the big schools, they want to use the portal. And so everybody knows at these other schools, the donors know at these schools, like we got to use the portal to stay relevant and to stay at the top of the mountain. I don't want to hire this coach who is obviously against it and is not going to use it. Like he's not going to help our program succeed. If he comes here, he can't. If he can't do it at where he's at now, and he refuses to change his ways, like nobody's going to want him. So it'll have to be like an NFL or TV gig. But yeah, it would be a mutual parting. They're not going to come out.
He won't. He won't. He'll do the Nick Saban route.
I think that Dabo's going to go to Clemson that they shouldn't fire him. It should be like a mutual parting where they basically say, "Hey, look." We're moving on, but let's do this mutually because out of respect for you and what you've done for our program, let's just mutually part ways. You go do your thing. We'll find a new coach.
Yeah, no, he'll definitely like do the Nick Saban route.
If they wouldn't have a season where they win like 3 games, then they would fire him.
Yeah, I don't think that'll happen, but I think he'll do the Nick Saban route where he'll just resign. He'll retire. He won't. I don't understand where these people think these successful collegiate head coaches will work out in the NFL. It very rarely works out unless you have prior experience being a legit coach in the NFL. I think he will just retire. I'm kind of like you where, it was just week 1. So, but we expect improvements at least from Gamecock fans. If it's something where this is what we see, what we saw last night every week. Yeah, I think it might be time to have some conversations.
Yeah.
Maybe Shane needs to light into his offensive coordinator, Dal Loggins, to change up some stuff. I don't know. So we'll see. But that's kind of it from our recap show. We'll be back live on Thursday. At least I will. I don't know if Steven will be able to do every Thursday, but I'll be live every Thursday. It'll be more pick 'em, previews for the South Carolina Clemson games. Also discuss more football games, what to expect. But I hope everybody has a safe extended holiday weekend.
Yep.
Football's here. It's in full swing. It felt like it never left because what we saw last night from the Gamecocks is what we saw mostly all last year. So nothing new.
Yeah.
But again, there's always room for improvement. So hopefully we see that. Thank you to all the people who were in the chat. We try to get to as much as we can. So onwards and upwards, and we'll see y'all back probably me and Steven combined next Sunday. And like I said, I'll see y'all on Thursday.
On Tuesday
y'all.
night.
Yep, high school show Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Just a heads up, I'm still beating Steven in the pick'ems, at least on the high school show, so that's not surprising.
Yeah.
But anyways, thank y'all. Steven, anything else before we go?
That's it. Everybody have a safe weekend.
All right, thank y'all.
Rest of the weekend.
Yeah.